Well, recently seeing some of the difficult footage to watch coming out of the Los Angeles area, seeing all the devastation from the wildfires, it got me thinking about all the great music that's come out of Los Angeles. And, in the 60s, we tend to think of the San Francisco scene as being so influential, and rightfully so, it certainly was. But there was a lot of great music that came out of Los Angeles at that time as well, and then continued throughout the 70s, 80s, and 90s. So I wanted to feature some of the bands that I think were very instrumental in that, and some of my favorite choices for albums if you were to pick up and listen to. And a lot of these are going to be pretty classic, well-known albums, so it's not going to be anything revolutionary, I don't think, for you. But records that I think had a big impact from the LA area. That's what we're going to talk about today on the program. So we talk about 1960s bands. The first one that comes to mind to me right off the bat from the Los Angeles area was the band that was supposed to challenge Beatlemania and be America's answer to Beatlemania, and that is the Byrds. And the Byrds did a lot of Dylan covers at the beginning. They started to be really responsible for the creation of folk rock, and certainly a lot of influential members came out of this band. Roger McGuinn and David Crosby, for sure. Chris Hillman as well. And so the first album I'm going to mention today is the Byrds, Mr. Tambourine Man, their debut on Columbia Records. And this was a very important record in 1965. Okay, we're going to go to 1968 for the next record. This is the debut from Spirit, and Randy California, the head of the group, did a lot of, it seemed like Spirit was trying to do every genre of music that had been possible at that time and put it together on one record, and it's a very eclectic record. This is also the album that features a song, Taurus, which many believe Led Zeppelin borrowed to create Stairway to Heaven. So if you're into that, that's what's on here. But this is a great record on its own, and it's another album from the LA scene that definitely was influential at the time for sure. Okay, up next, arguably one of the earliest country rock bands. This is Buffalo Springfield from 1966 with Neil Young, Richie Furay, and Stephen Stills. And although they're not all from Los Angeles, the band was signed out of LA, and this album is one of the earliest examples of blending country music and rock and roll. And it's something you see quite frequently done now. This was definitely a rarity at that time, and one of the albums that helped to create that genre. So definitely put this one in a must-have for the early Los Angeles scene. Up next is a band that came out of the Greenwich Village folk scene and transplanted to LA to form the Mamas and the Papas. This is the record that really did put them on the map. A couple of big hits here. And if you get the original pressing of this box is gone, and there's a toilet here that they eventually pulled off the cover. But this record is an early example of the Dylan influence that was going on at the time, and a lot of American bands were doing folk rock, and this is one of the earliest and most successful ones at that genre. Okay, up next, one of the first bands to even establish a music scene in LA was the Beach Boys, and not only in LA but in California in general, and establishing the surf sound and all the other things that they did. This is Pet Sounds, of course. And from 1966, the album that influenced the Beatles, Revolver, and other albums that really the big thing about this record, I think, is the fact that it was intended to be a studio album and not always a live performance record. And that was groundbreaking on its own, let alone the instrumentation used here in some of the music. So I think it's a great record. I definitely think over time it's become this iconic thing, but it's still, to me, an album that is important for the reason I mentioned before, that it did become an idea that you didn't have to tour your album. You could make a studio record that had sounds and effects and instruments that weren't necessarily going to be reproduced in a live setting, and it allowed the musical landscape to expand, and the idea that it wasn't just about the single always, it was about the entire album as its own piece. So for those reasons, I think this album should be iconic, but I do know why people are sort of iffy on how important it is, because nowadays it does sound a little bit dated, but at the time was very revolutionary and important. So there you go. Beach Boys' Pet Sounds comes in next on my list. Hey guys, thanks for watching. If you're a big fan of rock and roll and you like records, guitars, and stories about rock and roll, be sure to give us a like and subscribe and ring that bell. It helps us to grow the channel and keep more stuff coming. Thanks a lot. Up next on my list, a supergroup that emerged from the Hollies, the Byrds, and Buffalo Springfield, and that is Crosby, Stills, and Nash and their debut. And what a record this is. This was signed by Stephen Stills in Toronto in 2010. I was able to meet Stephen, and that was a big thrill for me. But this is a record that absolutely is one of the most important ever made and really helped to define the genre of folk rock and set a new high water mark for what that sound and genre would feel and look like. One of the labels that was emerging as being really influential and interesting in the late 1960s was the Elektra label, and one of the bands that they put a lot of marketing behind was a group called Love, and this is the record that I like the best from Love, although most people will tell you that this is kind of their greatest achievement, Forever Changes. I like the garage rock and kind of harder edge sound of this one, and to me it's a great debut record and one that I always like listening to. There's a track on here called My Little Red Book that I believe was the single, but it's a cool record. And eventually another LA band kind of swept in and took the wind out of their sails, and that was the Doors. We'll talk about them. But Love at this time was a band that they were putting a lot of marketing behind to try to push. Another band that was really pushing the boundaries of country rock was the Flying Burrito Brothers, and this came out in 1969. This is Chris Hillman from the Byrds and Graham Parsons' band, and one of the earliest bands that just took that country idea and put it into rock and roll. And this has been an album that has been talked about quite a bit. You know, over the years, it's become one of those albums that everybody should listen to at least once and check out. But certainly one that should be in your record collection for sure. The next band I'm going to talk about, I actually I didn't have any idea they were from Los Angeles because their biggest hit was about Boston. But this is the garage rock group, the Standells, and I really would have guessed they were from Boston, but they're not. Dirty Water being their big single, and kind of a one-hit wonder, but an important garage rock band and one of the earliest garage rock bands, formed in 1962 in Los Angeles. Another garage rock band that's worth noting from the LA scene is the Seeds, and this is from 1966. They had the big single Pushin' Too Hard off of this record. Had a couple of other regional hits, but one of the earlier garage rock tunes and albums that had an impact. Now we're going to move into a real psychedelic record that I always thought was from the San Francisco area, but it isn't, and it's the West Coast Pop Art Experimental Band, and Part 1. And this is really psychedelic stuff. If you're into that, this is a must-have for your collection, but definitely represents a certain period in time, and it's a bit of a time capsule to revisit for sure for what the late 1960s sounded like in the psychedelic realm. Well, in 1967, Elektra Records was looking for a home run, and they started with the band Love, which we looked at earlier in the show today. But they got their home run with the debut from the Doors. And this is, if you looked at Los Angeles bands from the 1960s, arguably the biggest record to come out of this era. And one of the best debut albums of all time. And this is the Doors, and that's on the original Elektra label. The next band I'm going to list is one I only own a greatest hits of, but this is the Grassroots, and they had a number of hits in the late 1960s, including Let's Live for Today, and what else is on this? Midnight Confessions, Where Were You When I Needed You, all of these hits, and they came out of the Los Angeles area as well. And I think this is really the one album to have of theirs if you're going to get one. It sums up everything, and it's a nice little compilation record of their career. So the Grassroots comes in next. Another band on the Elektra label to go along with the Doors and Love was a band that you may not really know that much about, but it's a pretty good psych album. This is a group called Clear Light, and Clear Light was signed to Elektra. And this is a pretty well-known psychedelic record if you're in this genre, but if you're just getting into psych music, this is kind of a must-have for that genre, and one that was definitely representative of the Los Angeles sound in the late 1960s. Well, a record that really challenged conventional rock and roll and what could be done on a recording came out in 1966 from the Los Angeles area, and that was the Mothers of Invention with Freak Out on the Verb label. And this is Frank Zappa, of course, and an album that really did push the boundaries of what you could do on a recording and started to challenge the idea of what a lot of society was thinking about. So this is a pretty adventurous album and one that you should have in your collection. Another great psychedelic rock band that came out of the Los Angeles area in the 1960s was the Electric Prunes, and this record had the big hit, I Had Too Much to Dream Last Night, and the Prunes were definitely a band that represented the psychedelic sound and was a new sound for this period of time in music history. So I would like to say that this is a must-have for your collection, but if you're not into psych, you won't like it, but it's pretty good. It's a good psych rock record, so check this one out, the Electric Prunes. Well, the next album I'm going to show doesn't really represent the sound of Los Angeles like some of these other acts like The Doors or Love or things like that, or some of the psychedelic rock or the folk rock of the Byrds and the Mamas and the Papas. This album represents more of a 1960s idea where music was being pushed as far as it could and into areas it had never been before, and with a kind of an unbridled approach that you weren't... you had no rules. You could go wherever you wanted with music, and the record labels sat back and let artists just go. And a prime example of that is Captain Beefheart and his Magic Band with Trout Mask Replica, and this might be the most unlistenable record in my collection, maybe of all time. I'm not sure. If you own this record, you'll know it's a very difficult record to get through. It's almost, for me, I can't listen to the whole thing at once. It's a double album. And it's very adventurous, but I'm not sure if that equates to good or not. But this is one that's highly debated if this is either one of the greatest records ever made or one of the worst, and I'm not sure. It's pretty hard to duplicate. So if you're into this, it's definitely pretty far out and one to maybe have listened to once in your life. But I'm not sure it's for everybody to own. But I'll put it on this list for how unique and different it was, and it does come out of the Los Angeles area. Well, a lot of the bands I've talked about on this list are very FM radio style bands, and ones that were not for the mainstream quite a bit. Some were, but quite a few of the psych and other genres like that were kind of on the fringe. This one is definitely an AM radio band, and that is the Turtles. And they had their big hit Happy Together, but they also did a cover of Bob Dylan's It Ain't Me, Babe, and had some other minor hits, but they were definitely more of a pop side of things, and one that was more accessible to a lot of people and got a lot more airplay than, say, some of the other bands on this list. So the Turtles, and that is a greatest hits compilation I've got here. Bit of a one-hit wonder that came out of the Los Angeles area. These guys were the Strawberry Alarm Clock, and this is a psychedelic record. This is a bit of a harder album to find, and it's definitely a kind of a one-hit album with the song Incense and Peppermints, which is the name of the record as well. And they did have a big hit with that. Another footnote about the Strawberry Alarm Clock was their guitarist, Ed King, would later go on to join Lynyrd Skynyrd. So a big shift in what he was playing at the time. But that is the next album on my list. This is a band that was formed in the 1950s and were basically a soul band and then turned psychedelic, and they helped to create the genre of psychedelic soul music, which was pretty new at the time. And this is the Chambers Brothers, and they had their big single Time Has Come Today, and they were formed in the Los Angeles area as well. And kind of a band that you're pretty well only going to know them for that, but this record's a good one, and it's a good listen all the way through, so this is definitely one I would recommend for your collection as well. A band that you might not think of from the Los Angeles area, and its original members all weren't from Los Angeles, but that's where their band made it out of in 1965. Releasing their debut in 1967 on the Liberty label, this is Canned Heat, and you might know their classic song Going Up the Country, which was released with the Woodstock soundtrack, but a lot of their stuff sounds a lot more bluesier, and this first debut album of theirs is a lot more of a blues record, and really more what they were all about, kind of a boogie band. and this is the first Canned Heat record, one I would recommend for your collection. Well, thanks for watching, guys. This is just albums I would recommend if you're looking to get into the LA scene of the 1960s and some of these influential artists and albums that really shaped music that we listen to today. So, you know, if you're a record collector, these would be ones that I definitely source out and have in your collection, and they're good listens all the way through. So, you know, everybody's thinking about all the people in Los Angeles right now that are going through pretty terrible times. So hopefully they get that sorted out and people get back on their feet. It's definitely it's been difficult to see from the outside, that's for sure. But our thoughts go out to them, and you know, hope for all the best for everybody involved. So, yeah, best of luck from this channel, that's for sure. Thanks everybody for tuning in and watching. If you like rock and roll history, if you like records, if you like guitars, or just music related topics, that's what we do on this channel. And I appreciate everybody tuning in. And give us a like and subscribe if you want to see more of that. And we will see you next time. Thanks for watching.